Tulsa Mayor Monroe Nichols, thank you so much for coming back to
Yeah,
Interact with Deon.
glad to be back.
So, since our last talk, a lot has happened. It's been over 200 days since you took office.
Yeah.
So, as a candidate and now as mayor, there's been six key priorities that you focused on: uh, homelessness, housing, improving student outcomes, expanding the economy, making Tulsa the safest big city in the country, and co-governing with tribal nations. So, I want to list off just a few things that you've done since taking office. You signed an executive order on housing to get to functional zero by 2030, and to with a goal of 6,000 new affordable units. You created the Office of Children, Youth, and Families, which is set to work with over 15,000 Tulsan children for pathways to economic mobility. Agile, a space propulsion testing company, announced plans for a Tulsa facility. You have a new commissioner of public safety. You've expanded alternative response teams. You've announced a $105 million road to repair plan to restore Greenwood in North Tulsa. You've responded to several shootings, even as crime is down overall compared to previous years. You've expanded police presence downtown. You've secured funding for crisis intervention. You've announced a temporary downtown curfew within the IDL for minors under 18, which we'll get into. And you've most recently signed an agreement, a historic settlement with the Muskogee Creek Nation. Now, please tell me, what did I miss?
You got most of it. You got most of it. I mean, I think, when I got elected and we came here and I talked about those priorities, and I think I probably said something about how they drive everything that we do. We do so many other things at the city, but like there has to be a constant focus on those things. I think each one of them are critically important to the future of the city. And so we staff the mayor's office that way. We work to budget that way. We work to drive those important initiatives that way, understanding that success does not always look like year one or as soon as we do it, everything is perfect. It's going to take some time. And our thought was you do as many things that you can manage and maintain early so we can show people as we go on through this first 4 years a new pathway forward, but something and how we do it together. I think every last one of those things require this community to come together to get them accomplished. Homelessness, housing, improving the student outcomes, the economic development work, public safety, tribal related, so on and so forth. And so, I think for me, I'm really pleased at the last 200 plus days. I can't say that I'm content because we got a lot of work to do. And so it's pleased but not content. We got a lot of work to do, but we're working.
I hear you. Now I want to get to probably one of the most in our faces issues currently when it comes to public safety.
Sure.
Just because of what we've seen in Tulsa and across the nation, really. But when it comes to Tulsa in the last few weeks, we have had a string of shootings.
Yeah.
Most notably the Juneteenth shooting, where I believe Tulsa PD just announced, I want to say yesterday, that they have apprehended and arrested the second suspect in that shooting. Overall, violent crime is trending down, with homicides down 20% over the last 4 years. But there have been a string of recent shootings, as we've discussed. In response, your office has pushed for and approved a temporary curfew for minors under 18, specifically within the IDL of downtown. And you have also participated in community town halls, you and members of your administration, over the last several weeks and ongoing, to bring the community to the table. So I have to ask, how does the curfew play into this, especially in light of the fact that the two arrested at Juneteenth were over 18?
Yeah.
And then how has enforcement downtown, how has it been working so far in your view?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what's important, I think the curfew took up so much space in a lot of people's minds because it required the council to take action on it. Action that I certainly supported. But, there's a number of other things that we have been doing and have done since then. So if you kind of look like the totality of the immediate response to the string of shootings, one, the day that I had the press conference when I announced that we'd be working or the council would be working to pass a curfew, we stood up a task force to get illegal guns off the street. In less than a week, 30 illegal guns out of the hands of people who are shooters. Yeah, absolutely. And the arrests and things like that. And that continues to go. Like, we're going to be really aggressive about getting illegal guns out of hands of people who have shown that they are willing to use them. So, and when people say, oh, the curfew wouldn't have impacted those other things, true, not true in some ways, but the reality is not everybody who who is a shooter or known to be shooting were involved in those particular shootings, right? So it's like about bringing that temperature down, making sure we're being aggressive there. We also, early in my time in office, announced the Community Violence Intervention Initiative. And the reason why it wasn't stood up completely is because in March, I think it was, about half the cities lost that grant due to federal cuts and pauses. Wow. And so I was like, well, we got to pause and to make sure Tulsa's also not going to lose the grant. So it slowed down the planning process, but that is also underway, right? That work is about putting trusted messengers and violence interrupters right in front of these young people who we know have, if they're not in the middle of violence, they're proximate to it.
Right.
So we knew that was a value before there was ever a shooting. Mm-hmm. I think the contribution of the Office of Children and Families is important to bring up in this context. And then the curfew is part of this conversation. The curfew is not because I believe that all kids under 18 are dangerous criminals who can't be trusted after hours. That is actually not why you pass a curfew. You pass a curfew to make sure that we can maintain a certain level of being able to guarantee public safety by lowering the size of the crowds. Crowd control actually in and of itself presents a public safety challenge. And I think we have to ask ourselves, while we're dealing with the string of very connected shootings, does it make sense to have to spend that much in the way of resources just to do crowd control downtown with young people who are not even old enough to go into the bars they're hanging outside of? Now, it does bring up another question. How do we create more opportunities for young people to have places to go? But I do think we have to ask ourselves, if we just take a step back, do we really think, like, what's the great value of a 17, 16, 15-year-old hanging outside of bars they can't get into downtown? And from a public safety trade-off, does it make sense to us to have to dedicate that amount of police resources just to make sure everybody's safe from a crowd control standpoint when we have all these other things that we're having to pursue? And in the first weekend of the curfew, the goal was never to write more curfew tickets. The goal was just to be able to say, hey, it's 8 o'clock. You got an hour.
Time to go home.
8:30. And what we have found is young people downtown are being responsible. I don't know if we wrote any curfew tickets that first weekend. Again, that wasn't the goal. But I don't want people to get lost and say, oh, the curfew was the solution to this. And that's a stupid solution, because the guys who were shooting they were all above 18. It's not just about, fear of young people shooting other folks. It really is like, you find me a downtown core business district where you got a bunch of kids who are under 21 who are just spending time outside of it. I just don't know why we would do that when we know we have an issue when it comes to resources that we're expending just to do crowd control related stuff.
I know that, the department is still short of where it wants to be in terms of the number of officers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the other thing is there's a reason why there's a sunset on the curfew, right? Mm-hmm. Like, just like with anything else, right now we just have a challenge and we need to reduce the number of people in crowds downtown. What does that allow me to do? In some ways, it allows me to make sure I have the appropriate officer resources to stand up my task force to get illegal guns off the street. I don't have to have a whole bunch of people downtown just to manage crowds. And so I do think it's a whole host of public safety related issues. But I guess my point is, I don't want people to think that it is my view that kids who are under 18 years old are just inherently dangerous and they can't be downtown. Right. That's actually, it's actually much different than that. It's about providing a safe environment for everybody's down there, and just large crowds present a public safety challenge that we want to make sure we're at least mitigating as best we can. Oklahoma City has done it, and there's still Thunder games. There's still kids going downtown to work and do all kind of things and all that kind of stuff. It's not loitering outside of bars. Mm-hmm. So downtown is not closed off to anybody. If you are under 18 and you go to a Drillers game and you watch the fireworks and you walk into your car, you don't have a police officer run you down and be like, what are you doing here at 10:15, right? That's not the goal, never been a goal. That's not how we even have operationalized in this first weekend, and it won't be as we move forward.
Well, that's certainly good to hear, and I know that you know, anytime you propose a new ordinance that impacts a lot of people, there's concerns about uh, unexpected,
Yeah,
results from that. Of course, even interactions in general with police,
sure.
there's concerns of things happening.
Yeah,
Um,
I think, and sorry, and I know we probably don't want to spend all our time talking about this, but I think it's also important people understand we didn't create a curfew. We just moved the time up 2 hours.
True.
And so a curfew was already there. And so whether that is at 9, 11, or midnight, I actually think it is much safer for the young people. And even if we're talking about officer interactions, if that interaction, hey, it's almost 9 o'clock, happens in a much less stressful environment than there are 1,000 people around there on the street corner and something happens. The shooting outside Reds, if you remember, there were a lot of young people around, and that makes it tough to deal with this public safety challenge between two individuals. So you talk about officer interaction. I think that's a great argument for why we need a curfew. I think it actually probably reduces officer interactions in high stress environments, which we know oftentimes that's where things tend to go wrong. And I think there's also this part of we have a long standing conversation as a community about community policing. What is community policing at the end? It's about officers having interactions with the community in a non event specific way. And I do think maybe this conversations that officers are having with young kids, I think it's possible as we continue to move forward that can be a very positive interaction. Not every interaction has to be negative. I think we have some work to do there, but I'm not naive as to think that there's not fear sometimes when it comes to those interactions. But I am hopeful that it does not have to be that way. And we have to change that paradigm if we're going to make sure this is a safe community.
Fair enough. And when it comes to making cities safer communities, I want to point out something because let's talk about it. Obviously, you are the first Black mayor of Tulsa in the city's history. And there are certain perceptions that Black leaders have to deal with here and everywhere in this country when it comes to their ability to lead.
Sure.
And so I wanted
Sure.
to bring up 3 Black mayors in other cities who are reducing violent crime.
Yeah.
And they're all using similar tools that you have proposed and have started to roll out. So in Birmingham, homicides are down 46% in the first 5 months of this year. Mayor Randall Wolfen credited to both the police, the real-time crime center, and the community increasing trust and coming forward with tips. In Chicago, homicides are down 33% through the first half of this year, the lowest in a decade.
Yeah.
Mayor Brandon Johnson attributed it to investing in mental health, behavioral health, youth employment, affordable housing, and in policing and community programs.
Yep.
And in Baltimore, the city has announced the least amount of homicides so far this year in over 50 years.
It's amazing.
And once again, it is credited to a partnership, evidence-based public safety strategies, community violence intervention, the Baltimore Police, and the state attorney's office. Yeah. You took office in December, so you haven't had years to work on this issue like these other mayors have. What does Tulsa being the safest big city in the country look like? And what can people in the community do to help make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, what does it look like very specifically is that we, based on the metrics associated with what that means, like there's some metrics. So it's homicides, property crimes, it's vehicular fatalities, and I think drug abuse is the other one, right? So we also recognize we got a lot to do as it relates to drug addiction and our response to that. And that's an area we have to really begin to work to build out. So it looks like the numbers are as such that we're on that list of the safest big cities in the country. From an accountability standpoint, I think from an operational standpoint, we're starting to build some of those blocks now. It looks like us long-term investing in things like the Community Violence Intervention Initiative, making sure that there is a system by which these young people who may be just as involved or, like I said, proximate to just as involved youth, that we have ways in which we're investing in people who they know and they trust, who can have those conversations about making sure we put them on a different path. But that path also has to exist. And that's why those youth employment programs are so important. There has to be an opportunity on the other side, because if you're asking me to do something different than what I know, well, what does that other thing look like, and what's going to be the benefit to me? And I think that's an important question for young people to ask, right? Like, whether we like it or not, they see some level of value in the things that they engage in. But Deon, I think that's because oftentimes our world is so small. The world is so small, and we have to broaden that world for these young people, because a lot of these kids are kids who just don't know what's out there for them, and they don't see it. They don't have anybody in their family there, and people use this cliche to say it takes a village, and I think that's what it is, right? Like, we have to make sure that this is a place that's filled with opportunity for young people, and I think we're doing some of those things to get there, but not enough of those opportunities are close to the communities in which a lot of these young people live. I think if you look across our community, there's a lot of things for young people, but did those things exist in place? And so we talk a lot about place-based strategies, like thinking about neighborhoods where you go into. So one of the things that we didn't talk about that I'm really proud of these first few months in office is the Neighborhood Conditions Index. And so we've taken every neighborhood in the city and ranked it kind of like based on the conditions in that neighborhood and prioritize them 1 to 3. And priority 1 neighborhoods are neighborhoods that we're working to get into to work with partners. But the city say, hey, every available resource we have, we want to change these poor statistics into better ones, right? And so they track exactly what we're talking about: health, wealth, public safety, all those things, right? And we are now working in 3 neighborhoods. They had to apply 3 neighborhoods to pilot this, but the goal is we're thinking about place-based strategies all across this community. And so it hits all those things you talked about. I think all those mayors are correct when they attribute it to affordable housing and youth programming. But I think the biggest thing is that we've got to create agency within the community. Yeah. And I think, part of the challenge has been people said they needed things. Some of them are not feasible, right? So I don't think it's just been, there's been like a deaf ear all the time. I think it's been like, some people in power may have decided that's really not feasible, so we're not going to do it, as opposed to going to the community saying, it's not feasible, here's why. What might be the other pathway that we could begin to accomplish these things? And so some of it is a redefinition in how we engage with citizens. And so we're trying to model that, whether it be through Neighborhood Conditions Index, whether it be the work through the community violence intervention pilot, how we interact, frankly, with major honor scores, with the Gilcrease Division, and then the majors at Mingo Valley and Riverside, continuing to lean into partnerships with community. I think it's us really taking a more community-centric focus and how things are going in folks' neighborhoods. I'll never forget, this is a story that dates back to my time as a staffer in the mayor's office. I was working for Kathy Taylor. We had just worked with Bank of America to raise money to start 18 new after-school programs across the community. And we were announcing this at a press conference. And I hate to call her out by mistake, because she still is the only person that I've ever known who was in a hybrid car. She's in a Prius and ran out of gas. It's like Kathy Taylor holds that distinction. I've never heard that happen to anybody else. Shout out to Kathy Taylor. She was great to me. She still continues to be a good friend and mentor. But Kathy was late because she ran out of gas. And so I'm at the school trying to kill time with the kids. And I'm like, what's your favorite animal? And they all yell out their favorite animal. And I was probably 30, 40 kids and they're waiting for the mayor to come speak. And I'll never forget, it was at Hawthorne Elementary School. Never forget, I said, how many of y'all have been to the zoo? I'm thinking every hand's going up. The zoo's 3 miles down the street. 20% of hands went up, maybe. Wow. And it just struck me. I mean, it was not a fault of the kids or anything, but it's like the world is too small. Yeah. And we got to open up the world of possibility for a lot of these young people and give them the tools to be able to achieve it. Crime goes way down. You do that kind of stuff, man. It just does. It's been proven over and over again. Birmingham, Chicago, Baltimore are places that a lot of folks would say, I don't know how you turn that around. Right. And it's been turned around by investing in things that matter and working with community.
And I mean, I've only been able to attend one of the several community meetings that have happened in the past couple of weeks, and just seeing the reaction when young people feel seen and they feel visible.
Absolutely.
There's a visceral reaction and they feel like they have more of a stake in this community.
Yep. I tell you, whether it be the East Central flag football team who came up to see me early in my time and after they won their championship, or the young people that were in New Jerusalem just this week at the event we had on Tuesday. They tell you what they need, and I've heard it over and over again. We need safe places to go that don't cost a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so they stand up, they say those things. It's pretty basic need, right?
Yeah.
We have to create those places for them. We need to reduce the need of the desire for anybody to be downtown, like at midnight. If you're under 18, they can't do anything there anyway. They're telling us we need things to do, and so we end up here because that's where everybody else is at. We engage in certain types of activities and behaviors at times. That's what everybody else is doing, which is true about human behavior, whether you were 16 or 17, or whether you were 41 or 50 or whatever the case may be. I mean, we sometimes begin to take on the environment around us, and that is not just true for kids. I think it's true for everybody.
True, very true. I want to move on to the road to repair.
Yeah.
I want to see where we're at on that. Just for people who might need a recap. You announced the road to repair to begin the process of restoring Greenwood, restoring North Tulsa, and restoring the dignity of this city. The money collected through the private charitable trust will direct $24 million to a housing fund, $60 million towards a cultural preservation fund, and $21 million towards a legacy fund that would support the acquisition of land and scholarships for survivors and descendants. They fall in line with recommendations proposed by the Cities Beyond Apology Commission and by recommendations from Justice for Greenwood Foundation. Now, you didn't call this reparations. We, the media, did. You call it a road to repair. Where are we on that journey? And when it comes to the survivors who may not be able to finish that journey, how do you plan to ensure they're fully repaired while they're still alive? Yeah.
So, I mean, I actually will say I come at this with a tremendous amount of humility into this conversation because I'm not a descendant. And so the last question first about the survivors, I was asked very directly for something from Mother Fletcher that I'm working on right now, and looking for some folks to help me accomplish that. And I'm only not mentioning what it is specifically out of respect for her. And so there's that part of the things that I've been asked very directly about that we're currently working on. That's really important. Where we are on it, I think the trust documents are just about submitted. There's a lot of back end work around bank accounts and tax our tax status and all those types of things that are actually being worked. The back end of it are things that's happening right now. This fall, we will have an executive director of the trust, I believe, named. So we're working through that process right now. Board of advisors, that'll be a mix of both local and national folks that we'll be working through. So those conversations are very active. And right now, as it currently sits, I'm the only trustee, and so there'll be a number of other trustees that'll join me there, and then building out the program. So this first year gave us the opportunity to bring some focus to the programmatic pieces, because there's a lot of different programmatic pieces, and a lot of them are quite diverse from each other. Like, how do you manage a housing fund is dramatically different than how you think about business grants, no interest loans, and scholarships, for example. And so making sure we're building out those programmatic pieces really strong. And there's a lot of opinions about that, right?
I'm sure. Around
eligibility, around all that kind of stuff, right? And so like what we have really focused on is like not to get caught up in some of the battles of the past, and I say that not disrespectful to anybody. I think those are all important conversations, right? But just to say, let's figure out if we can find the middle ground on these things to make sure that it is true to its mission, which is, starting the restorative repair work for those who are most impacted on one end, but also making sure that we can think about that in a more broad sense. So how do you strike that balance that it's real for descendants, but also like we're not leaving people out who are part of the descendant community? Right. And then it's the raising of the capital, right? So we have active conversations right now. Somebody asked me the other day, are you going to get the whole 105 raised in a year? I don't know if we get the whole 105 raised in a year, but the trust goes in perpetuity. So I think over time the trust will take in and spend well above $105 million. And so we're thinking about what are those big initial pieces. I mean, because here's the deal. In reality, you can't spend $105 million a year anyway if you had it. But we lean into the housing work. Let's get that secured so we can do that in alignment with the other housing work we're going to do as a community with Improve Our Tulsa. Now, this is separate from Improve Our Tulsa, right? Separate from that $75 million. But as we're thinking about the systems, like, we want to make sure that those are in someone's life. So there's a priority on the housing work just because we got this other tranche of money that we're going to be spending community wide. And we don't want to say, oh, we're doing this around the community, but not this yet. Right.
That makes sense.
So that part. And then I'm really aggressive about the business loans, the grants, and the scholarships of being priorities. The $60 million that we plan to invest in cultural landmarks and things like that might lag just a little bit from the other two, just because I am prioritizing the housing, the scholarships, and the business loans. And one of the reasons why is because the whole goal around this is I don't think that you can ever, make people whole. That's not possible. And I said that in my speech when I announced the trust that, like, the DOJ laid out, like, it's really, there's not really a mechanism by where you can do that. So that's why I say you come into this with humility, because I never wanted people to think that I thought I was fixing all of that. I'm not fixing all that.
That's fair.
What we're trying to do is restore what was special about the Greenwood district. And so those folks who built it, those folks who lost it, those folks who died, those folks who survived and were too scared to tell their story, the two that remain, everybody who knows that story in this community overall, that the last chapter in the Greenwood story is not the massacre. That the chapters, there are chapters that still need to be written, but that community should look like what it would have looked like had it went on uninterrupted.
Right.
And I think that is my North Star as we start this work.
Well, I hear you. Tribal sovereignty.
Oh yeah.
On June 25th, your office announced an historic settlement with the Muskogee Creek Nation to end the litigation from the previous administration. I want to say a quote from the City of Tulsa website. This agreement keeps all enforcement actions the same, but outlines that City of Tulsa municipal cases will be sent to the nation's tribal court if the defendant maintains tribal status from any tribe and whose case was initiated in the city limits of Tulsa that lie within the boundaries of the Muskogee Nation. Now, the agreement also creates a working group that over the next 8 months will solidify resolutions to procedural matters relating to public safety. And you note, or your office notes, that state and federal cases are not included as part of the agreement, Governor Stitt. In layman's terms, what does this mean and why does it matter?
So if I can just back up a little bit,
go for it.
Right. I think it's important that everybody understands, like, the genesis of how we arrived at McGirt, O'Brien, the lawsuit itself, and the settlement, and all the other active cases. So the McGirt opinion from the Supreme Court it affirmed that tribal reservations in some cases were never disestablished by treaty. So there's agreement with the federal government that the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Cherokee Nation, in our context, Osage is not one of those tribes, but their reservation was never disestablished, and so it existed. And so how you think about who has jurisdiction in a criminal matter, that impacts that based on the fact that those reservations are actually no different than Oklahoma as a state. The federal government holds in this case is the Muskogee Creek Nation, a nation within a nation. So, like, and they have sovereignty on that land. And so you had that part that really addressed the issue of a Creek citizen on a Creek reservation. It didn't necessarily, and this is when the tricky part came up. What happens if it's a Cherokee citizen on Creek Nation reservation? What does that mean? And that's where the O'Brien case, hit us at the city, which was core to the city's lawsuit that I inherited. I made a commitment to get us out of the courtroom, understanding that these are not the opinions of a mayor, or Governor Stitt's opinion doesn't really matter. I mean, no more than mine does, to be honest. This was established federal law affirmed by the Supreme Court, right? And so then the question is, as the largest city that's all Indian reservation, how do we think about public safety long term? And how do we get out of this lawsuit that we've been engaged in, knowing that a lawsuit ends in 3 ways. We win, get sole jurisdiction. In that case, the agreement that we signed can be nullified because the world has changed. The other is we end up in the same situation right now with this concurrent jurisdiction, in which case I think considering how we might partner better with the tribal nations is incredibly important given where we live and standing on the side of sovereignty. The third is we lose, and then we are going to be killing ourselves to go work with the tribes on these public safety issues. And so as I think about 2/3 of the possible solutions require us to really work very closely with the tribes. And I would argue 100% of them does, but 2/3 of them would mean that we have no other option than to why wait? How about we go ahead, have a settlement. Let's lay out how we're going to work through some of these technical challenges, and let's get to work on making sure we can make this the safest big city in the country. I truly believe that Chief Hill, Chief Hoskin, Chief Standing Bear, although doesn't necessarily apply in the same ways, but I truly believe this is their reservation too. They want to make sure the reservation is safe. So I appreciate that and understand that. So what does this agreement mean? It means that the misdemeanor cases that we have as a city, if the defendant is a citizen of a tribal nation, we are sending those cases to the tribal court associated with which reservation that person was pulled over for a speeding ticket for, or you committed that misdemeanor, right? And there's some work that we need to do to make sure that we're working with the courts on, and the settlement spells it out, how they're gonna make sure they're prosecuting these cases in good faith and all this kind of stuff. When it comes to major crimes, so felonies already, if you're a tribal citizen, go to it goes to U.S. Attorney's Office, it goes to federal court. It's true. McGirt is true in this case. And our hope and desire is that we all work together so that a citizen doesn't have to worry about anything. People have talked about these 2 tiers of justice, which is just not accurate. It's not true. And it's really to feed into a political position that somebody might have. I said at the press conference the other day, and it's true, when the McGirt opinion was issued, Governor Stitt should have done what I'm doing right now. I'm in this position right now because of that ongoing feud, because the governor showed that kind of leadership in the beginning. And here he is now, several years later, almost out of office, and he's going to leave office with putting us all in a position of trying to figure this out city by city, which is not a great way of doing it. I truly believe that if the governor 4 years ago would have worked with tribes, this would be a non-issue at this point. And so we just have to do what we have to do because we're all Indian reservation. And so you got to ask yourself, do you want to continue to align yourself with folks who have the luxury of being able to have a political fight, or do you have to lean into doing the hard work to make sure that there's no holes in how we account for public safety? It's hard. It's hard. It's going to be a little bit harder for our officers for a little bit to make sure that we're getting things done. It's going to be maybe a little more difficult for their courts that might not be fully prepared for the volume. But that's why we work together right now and say, okay, let's just think about how do we handle these deals. Let's coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Maybe we can even coordinate with the district court here. But we've all got to come around the table and solve a problem, as opposed to saying, no, let's just keep trying to hammer home a political position we might have. To me, that's putting your head in the sand. That's work avoidance. That doesn't help us continue to be safer. We want to do the hard work. We want to make sure this is a safe place. We also think we have to trade between safety and sovereignty, and we will not accept the premise that we do.
Well, you stood 10 toes down on it. You campaigned on it, and you fulfilled that promise.
Yeah.
I do have a follow-up.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you also know, the Muskogee Creek Nation is currently in litigation with freedmen descendants, whose ancestors were illegally expelled from the nation. Muskogee Creek Nation district judge in 2023 ruled that the Treaty of 1866 remains the supreme law of the land. Article 1 of that treaty was used for the McGirt case. It's a treaty that specified in Article 2 that descendants of freedmen who were formerly enslaved would always be citizens with equal rights. What is your response to freedmen who feel let down by the fact that they weren't included in the negotiation?
Yeah. So I think what I think sometimes the two issues get very much conflated. We were not addressing the issue of citizenship within the nation as a part of this agreement. This was a lawsuit where a Creek citizen said, "City, you don't have the right to prosecute me," right? And so that's what we were addressing, that underlying legal question. The status of Creek freedmen in the nation would have been unimpacted no matter what. That never would have played a matter. I think because the city and the nation were involved in litigation, there was, maybe there was a thought that maybe there'd be some legal strategy to solve that other issue. But I think I think there's a whole different case that they're working on that front. And to be honest, one of the reasons why I didn't engage Creek freedmen in this particular case is just because I just didn't believe it to be relevant to this case as we're trying to address this underlying public safety issue. It does not mean it's not a value that I don't think it's important, and I don't think that they're right. It just wasn't necessarily, in my view anyway, it just wasn't necessarily part of trying to answer the question of how do we address public safety issues, given these court opinions that we have, given the very specific litigation that we had out in front of us. I think that's probably obviously a battle within the nation. I mean, I know where my values lie in that conversation, but this is a little bit of a different issue, and so, I hope and I believe that given the track that we're on as a community, why everybody across the country is afraid to talk about issues with race at times, issues with equity at times. We are having those conversations. We're talking about tribal sovereignty and how do we repair things that happened in 1921 and since, and doing that while we're also talking about making these big jumps across this community, put Tulsa on the map. And so we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And so I guess my point in all that is that I'm happy to, if I'm a helpful voice, to have a conversation with freedmen, which I have, and the nation about this particular issue, right? I think that's important that we keep those things separate, because it's also really critical as mayor that I address this public safety issue, addressing the city that I'm mayor of. But I think I've shown a willingness and a real interest to have hard conversations about things that a lot of people ain't talking about right now. And I'd be happy to continue to do so.
I know you have to go. I had a lot more questions for you.
What you got for me? I'll take one more.
Look, I have one more thing, and then I actually have a gift for you that I wanted to give you. And I'll ask my question while I'm getting it out. But a lot of people are afraid right now. A lot of people are afraid for the future of our democracy when it comes to our national leaders that we obviously don't have control over. What are you doing, not on the public safety side, but on the community safety side? What can you tell the residents of Tulsa that you're doing to keep them safe in a country that is trying to erode all of our democratic norms?
Yeah, I think that I will say this. I don't think that it's a country that's trying to eradicate. I know, like, there's some leaders who are there, right? But I do think that what we all have to be reminded of is that it really is our job. It's either we the people or it's not. And so on some level, I think we should take this as a real challenge. I've said over and over again that the push has always been to make sure that this country lives up to what it says it is on paper. And I think we sometimes get we're almost rocked to sleep, and we take that for granted when there's somebody who we tend to agree with more who occupies the White House or who has a majority in Congress. We think somehow, some way that things are a little bit easier because they're there. And I don't think it's true. I think the assignment is the assignment no matter who's in office, which is the reason why. And just a quick run back to the Freedman deal, DeMario Solomon Simmons is my dog. That's my homie. He very much disagrees with, how, I've addressed this issue with the Creek Nation, because he believes the Creek Freedmen should have been part of it. And I respect that. And I told him, and you can ask him, I said, we're friends. You my dog. I get we differ on this deal. So if you feel like you have to criticize me about, like, I understand that, Just because I'm your friend does not, I'm also the mayor. And if you disagree with something the mayor does, that does not mean that we can't be friends all of a sudden. And so I think we often think, oh, my friend's in there, so everything is fine. I can chill. But this other person there, oh, no, now I got to take to the streets. No, sometimes there's always a time to take to the streets potentially, or to leverage your relationships behind the scenes. Because the pressure I feel every day being mayor is that time flies by. Are we gonna get our stuff accomplished in that time or not? And so like I'm not super comfortable because I know how much work we have to do. And I think that's how we all should be. And just a really kind of, I think this is not the first time our country's been in a kind of a watershed moment. And I think that we all have to recognize that it is really it's all neighborhood to national. When I was in DC right before inauguration for U.S. Conference of Mayors. And there was a realization, I think, from a lot of mayors that the environment might get really, really tough for a number of different reasons. Just if we just take the investment side of it, the investment might be leaving us, but that doesn't change our job. We don't get to take it off because we think it's going to be harder. It is us really now saying we got to look inward to our community and come up with really good examples about how you solve problems. You brought up 3 of them from 3 mayors across the country. You say, hey, sounds like you guys are doing the same thing. We have to learn from each other on how we solve problems, no matter how much money is flying around and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, it really is this neighborhood to national strategy that we're in right now as a country, and it has to ladder up. And that's how it always should have been anyway, in a lot of ways. Your job as mayor should not be easier because your party's in power in the White House. Same thing as the governor and anything else. This is not an analogy to where I think we are right now, but I think it's important, right? Every plan that I have as mayor, just words on paper until we do them. Every word written in a law, just words on paper unless people follow them. Every high ideas we go into Independence Day about who we're supposed to be as a country are just ideas and maybe not reality unless we decide that we're going to try to live up to them. And I think these are great times to challenge to say, are we who we think we are, or do we decide to hunker down and cry because we don't like what's going on? Or is that a challenge, right? I was in Selma, Alabama on the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. I saw those freedom riders in wheelchairs, man, and them being on that bridge on that day, I ain't had a day hard like that. And so that means I do have to wake up, and no matter what comes from the White House or the governor's office or whatever, that's only context for what's out in front of me and what we have to go and accomplish and figure out how do we do it, because the people I represent are counting on me to do it, and they're counting on me to do it, whether it's raining or snowing, who's in the White House, that kind of deal. And I think we all should take that as a real challenge. So yeah, I think that I can appreciate how people feel, but I also hope people in this community and really across the country find a place of hope, because hope means that you're getting involved and you feel like you have agency in the future. And what I don't want people to feel is like, there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, okay. You might not be able to go pass a bill in Congress, but there are some things that you can do about it. And it starts as small as engaging people who thinks different than you politically in a conversation about the future of your community, or going and volunteer for this, that, or the other. Then you see the face of the goodness of the people around you, and that does change your perspective. And I hope that as we go through the next 3.5 years of my time in office, next 3.5 years of the president's time in office, that we all find our way to find that place of hope, because that means we're leaning into each other for solutions that are going to lead us to a better spot, not necessarily waiting on somebody else to do it.
I hear you. Well, they're going to beat me up if I ask you any more questions. So the last thing I want to do is, I don't know if you've heard of Oklahoma's only Black-owned soda.
Oh.
So I want to ask you to try it with me.
All right.
I've already tried it and I love it. So really, it's you trying it.
What's the other flavors? Well, I don't get to pick.
Okay. So I was debating. This is my favorite flavor, but
okay. Hold on. Let me see, man.
Summer Nights.
Yeah, I was like, hold on. You picked the one out in the middle. I'm like, what's going on?
Look, there is like a spicy lemonade.
Oh, I don't know about spicy
Not
lemonade.
Not spicy, but I mean like it's flavorful.
Okay, I got it.
Blackberry.
Ooh.
So it's blueberry lemonade. I'm sorry, and then blackberry.
I don't know about butterscotch soda, so I'm not gonna do this one. What is that? That's your favorite?
I mean, it's my favorite, but my granny didn't like it. She liked
your granny didn't like
the blueberry one.
She liked the blueberry. What's the blueberry? Blueberries lemonade. Blackberry cream. Oh, blackberry cream sounds good. Though.
Try whatever. Look, I handed you my favorite, so you try what you think is your favorite.
I'm gonna go. I want to go. Part of me wants to go blackberry cream, but your grandmother likes the blueberry lemonade.
But you might have different taste buds. I mean,
I'm an old soul, man. Like I like what old people like.
Okay.
Like butter pecan's my favorite ice cream.
Okay.
Like old
You are
school.
old, so
yeah, I'm
yeah,
old.
yeah.
All right. I'm gonna go with the old people taste buds.
All right, I'm gonna go with
that's who I am. Why are you drinking the ones you have all the time? You should do it different. Have you tried them all though?
I have tried them.
All right, cheers. All right, here we go. Oh yeah. Great, know what you're talking about. Yeah. You know what I like about it? Hold on.
Yeah, take a couple.
So I don't drink a lot of soda.
Yeah.
Not because of healthy deals, just don't. I don't drink a lot of water either. But like sometimes going down, like I have to burp a whole lot. Like it's not as biting as some of those other ones are.
It's not. And you know why? They just put a new batch out that's only 30 calories. That whole can is 30 calories.
It is healthy.
It's healthy.
I mean, I guess it's
it's healthier. It's healthier.
Yeah, I know. Don't have me saying, "Oh yeah, he said the soda's healthy. Everybody's drinking it."
But you know, Afropop sponsored this episode, so I told him I'd come out. And have you try it?
Afropop, absolutely. I gotta say, I did not. Hold on, I'm on camera right here.
Yeah,
I did not know about Afropop before today, but it is delicious. I appreciate them sponsoring the episode, and I do want to say, as always, I tell Neo this. Oftentimes, I'll tell you this. I am so appreciative of the Black Wall Street Times. I know there's some times where you guys take a chance on stories that a lot of people aren't writing, and or surface things a lot of people aren't talking about. And just like my conversation with DeMario, who's my dog, and very proud of what he's accomplished, I feel the same way about y'all. There'll be times where we're having a real debate about what's right for the future of the city. And I appreciate the fact that you all are willing, because I know like there's a lot of disagreement about the curfew and things like that. And I think it's important that you continue to not just hold people accountable, but just give people information that they need in the way in which they want it, in the way in which they intake it. I do believe like that information's a civil right. I mean, I know that's something that the Black Wall Street Times talks about. There's so much going on all the time. Creating those pathways for people to be able to gauge, learn, to interact with each other on those issues is incredibly important. And so I appreciate y'all for continuing to do that for this community. I know your footprint actually goes far beyond Tulsa. And I just hope you guys continue to be more and more proud about what you continue to build over time, because a lot of us are watching, a lot of us appreciate it. A lot of us are very grateful. And you, sir, are someone that we certainly appreciate.
Look, don't start with getting me on the spot, but I appreciate that. And, you know, I can promise you that we're going to keep working to bring people information and to hold our leaders accountable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.